Hi, this is your second presenter, Kay, and I will be discussing about communism in America and Asia. Specifically, what do Americans think of communism? Communism was first applied as a system of government by the Soviet Union, and since then it became a worldwide movement. However, this was not the case in America. Why? It's because of the Red Scare, or the widespread fear over the threat of communism in America. So what was the root cause of it? It's the Russian Revolution of 1917, or the Bolshevik Revolution. Although at this time, socialism, which is deemed to be closely related to communism, was already quite popular in the US, the violent approach of the Bolsheviks to prosper the communism in Russia brought hysteria to the Americans. The first Red Scare occurred after the end of World War I. During this period, America was experiencing a decline in their economy after the production of war weapons and vehicles slowed down. This is when labor strikes became on the rise, particularly led by two main socialist groups, the International Workers of the World and the Socialist Party. Other than that, there were also the anarchists. Although these three were distinct with each other at that time, they were all labeled as one, the radicals, and portrayed as supporters of the Soviet Union's communist revolution. Furthermore, the US government passed the Sedition Act of 1988 in order to shut off the protesters. The Red Scare intensified during the 1919 when a series of anarchist bombings were discovered, targeted at high-ranking US government officials and notable businessmen. Due to this, the US launched what they called the Palmer Raids, led by Mitchell Palmer in an attempt to capture suspected leftists who are mostly immigrants to deport them from the country. However, most of the arrests were merely based on suspicion, victimizing a lot of innocent workers. After that, the Red Scare eventually cooled down as America underwent Great Depression. But that was not the end of it, as the second Red Scare occurred after World War II, the Soviet Union rising to becoming a superpower and creating tension with US, which was later known as the Cold War. This rivalry between the two countries raised concerns in the US that communist and leftist supporters in America might work as Soviet spies. That's when US President Truman decided to take action by issuing the Loyalty Order, which focuses on determining the loyalty of those who work in the government, and the Truman Doctrine, which focuses on helping other democratic states prevent the authoritarian forces. The US government specifically formed the House of the Un-American Activities Committee to investigate communist activity that might be happening inside the government as well as in Hollywood film industry. During this time, they even blacklisted award-winning scriptwriters, directors, and actors like Charlie Chaplin just because of baseless suspicions. These crackdowns, called McCarthyism, were named after its key investigator Senator Joseph McCarthy, who took advantage of the situation to build his own political interests. But despite these past events, the Communist Party of the USA have managed to survive for 100 years since its foundation in 1919, and have even contributed to the promotion and creation of a number of programs, as you can see with this list. And actually, there were also quite a lot of prominent advocates of communism in America. We have here Charles Emil Gutenberg, who's considered to be the very first leader of the Communist Party of USA, Carl Browder, who's responsible for the growth of US Communist Party's members, and an American black woman named Angela Davis, who even received a Lenin Peace Prize by the Soviet Union. In the end, we could say that communism does not go well with the Americans. Why? Well, it's quite obvious. First, they were a capitalist country, and second, communism will strip down the liberties enjoyed by the Americans. Although in present time, some American youths are seeing the communist principles in a positive light now that capitalism is under crisis. But who knows what may happen to America in the future? Among all the countries in America, there is only one who has been ruled by communism: the Republic of Cuba. From the 15th century, Cuba was a colony of Spain until the Spanish-American War. After that, Cuba regained independence by being a U.S. protectorate. However, due to its weak democratic system, it falls under the totalitarian rule of Eugenio Batista. This is when Fidel Castro, the purveyor of Cuban communism, rose into power. He ended Batista's rule through his organization called the 26th of July Movement, and afterwards established his 50 years of communist regime. The original Communist Party of Cuba was formed in 1925, 2 years after Fidel Castro's 26th of July movement. The Popular Socialist Party and parts of the student-based Revolutionary Director merged and united to become a Communist Party of Cuba. In Cuba, the government controls most aspects of Cuban people's lives, from the use of media even to their religious life. We're not actually quite familiar with Cuba compared to other communist countries, so to give you a rough picture of it, I'd like to set some examples. If you think Philippines have the worst internet services, then you might want to change your mind, because in Cuba, to be able to connect to 3G data services provided by ITEXA, the only telecommunication in their country, you even have to wait in line for 2 hours just to buy internet cards provided by the government, which can only be used in designated Wi-Fi hotspots, mostly located in parks. Furthermore, most of the means of production in Cuba are owned and run by the government, and 80% of the labor force is employed by the state. Every Cuban household has a ration book known as libreta, which they use to receive a monthly supply of food and other staples. But after the change in presidency, Cuba has been undergoing reforms, opening their countries for more economic opportunities and allowing private ownership of lands. Also, about 13% of Cuban workers are now in the private sector operating their own businesses. Cuba is also improving their tourism, which is by the way an amazing tourist destination, especially if you are a fan of classic cars. Moving on, let's now take a look to Asian communism. In this part, we'll be covering the 4 out of 5 remaining communist countries in the world. So how did communism reach Asia? Well, it was in 1921 that communism first took hold of China after being inspired by the Russian Revolution. Soon after, some Asian countries followed, particularly the French Indochina consisting of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, which are formerly a colonial region of France. Due to this, the US were once again threatened. They created a theory based on their study of the situation in Indochina, which they called the domino theory. This is the belief that the fall of Indochina to communism would lead to similar communist victories in neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, just like a falling domino. However, some critics were saying that this was just an excuse by the Americans to meddle in the affairs of the Southeast Asian countries and to suppress the influence of the Soviet Union. That's because even though Americans failed to stop communism in Vietnam, most of the nations in the Asian region remained out of communist control. Hence, this theory is proven not true at all. Now let's talk about the country that first welcomed communism in Asia, the China. As we all know, China has been the most powerful and largest economy not just among the communist countries but also the world. But what's the secret why China managed to succeed with communism, which has failed in the Soviet Union and claimed to be destructive by the Americans? Well, let's go back to the early years of Chinese communism. In 1911, the Xinhai Revolution ended the 2,000 years of Chinese imperialism. It was then replaced by the Republic of China. But because much of the country was under the control of warlords, it remained disunited, resulting to the dissatisfaction of nationalist movement with the government. In 1919, the May 4th movement started due to China's failure to gain some concessions during the Treaty of Versailles, and among these revolutionaries was Mao Zedong. It was Mao Zedong who founded the People's Republic of China and led the Chinese Communist Party, which was now considered as the second largest political party in the world next to India. Furthermore, Mao developed a wisdom, the Chinese interpretation of communism. The Maoists started a strong communist tradition known as the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, which aimed to transform China into a heavy industrialized society. However, this only resulted to famine and was remembered as the biggest mass murder in the history of the world, far worse than the Holocaust. After Mao's death, the ideals of China shifted under Deng Xiaoping to a form of market socialism. He introduced the four modernizations and became credited as the person who turned China into the economic world power that it is today. From a wisdom the Mao Zedong thought emerged, which is said to be Marxism-Leninism applied to suit China's condition. So what makes China different from the rest of the communist countries? Well, it's because Red China is not completely red. What does that mean? First, China is a market economy with socialist characteristics. The government only controls a part of the economy, and although they have central planners, they still allow the existence of a free market. Moreover, in China, the media are tightly controlled, which help them sway the public opinion in ways that are favorable to their government. China's Great Firewall, internet censorship, controls access to many Western news websites, and China also believes that lifting its citizens from poverty prompts individual liberties. Next on our list is Vietnam. Vietnam is considered to be one of the world's fastest growing economies. However, before becoming the promising communist country that it is today, Vietnam has faced many adversities in the past. The first Communist Party in Vietnam was founded in 1930 by Ho Chi Minh in Hong Kong and was called the Communist Party of Indochina. The Communist Party was almost entirely wiped out because of the French suppression. Various communist and non-communist parties sprang up in Vietnam around this time, and it was Ho Chi Minh who created the Vietnamese Fatherland Front, an umbrella group for all the parties to make them stronger and win the fight for independence. However, it was the Communist Party of Vietnam that dominated, and when the country declared independence in 1945, it was thus recognized as a Communist Party by China and the Soviet Union. This sparked 3 decades of war between North and South Vietnam. North Vietnam was supported by communist allies including the Soviet Union and China, while South Vietnam was supported by the US and other anti-communist military forces. Ho Chi Minh led the war for over 3 decades. However, he didn't live to see Vietnam's independence, and he died even before the Vietnam War ended and reunified as a communist country in 1976. One of the greatest legacy of Uncle Ho was the Ho Chi Minh thought, which was the Vietnamese version of communism. So how does their communism works? Just like China, Vietnam has adopted a socialist-oriented market economy known as Doi Moi reforms. They allow markets to exist but under strict state supervision or through state-owned enterprises in certain key industries like banking and energy. They also impose a system of price control on certain products and services. More importantly, all lands are owned and managed by the Vietnamese state and can only be leased. As many communist countries, Vietnam also controls the media and the internet and limits the freedom of its citizens. The third communist country in Asia is Laos. It is the only landlocked country in Southeast Asia, which means it's entirely surrounded by land. Also, it's one of East Asia's poorest countries, and as I mentioned earlier, Laos was once part of French Indochina with Vietnam and Cambodia. During the 1930s, some Laotian was recruited as a member of the Indochinese Communist Party originally founded by the Vietnamese. Then in 1953, after joining forces with Vietnam Group, Laos was able to restore their independence and ousted the French rulers. However, civil war started between the royalists and the communist group Pathet Lao. Soon after, the Pathet Lao, which was renamed as Lao People's Revolutionary Party, gained control of the country and became the only legal party of Laos. It was Quezon Pombihan, best known as Anbay, who helped in founding the new party and was also the first to become its leader. Anbay became the most important Lao communist from this point in Vietnam. However, Lao seemed to struggle in keeping up with other communist countries. What could have been the reason behind that? Well, let's take a look at how communism works in Laos. Laos, like any other communist countries, dominates all aspects of politics, controls people's courts and the media, and regulates people's rights and freedom. But what makes Laos different is that for a long time they isolated their country from the rest of the world. It was just recently that Laos started to liberalize their economy, opening stock exchange in 2011 and joining the World Trade Organization in 2013. Laos has been trying to follow the steps of Chinese socialist market and slowly transforming from a landlocked to a land-linked country. The last on our list is the world's most secretive and oppressive country, the North Korea. North Korea was classified as an authoritarian regime and even practices political dynasty with the Kim family ruling since 1948 up to the present. Communism started in North Korea after the end of the Japanese invasion. The United States and the Soviet Union divided the Korean peninsula into two zones of influence along what was called the 38th parallel. In the northern part, the Soviets supported the young communist guerrilla at that time named Kim Il-sung, who later became the premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and marked down in history as the third longest-serving non-royal head of state in the 20th century. Furthermore, Kim Il-sung was also the one who introduced the Downward Imperialism Union aimed at promoting Marxism-Leninism in North Korea. This union became the root and foundation of the present ruling party in their country, which is the Workers' Party of Korea. The Workers' Party of Korea follows the monolithic ideological system and the Juche developed by Kim Yong-ju and Kim Jong-il. The monolithic ideological system serves as a guide on how North Korean people must behave and should be strictly followed in their everyday lives. On the other hand, the Juche is the North Korean version of communism. So what was communism like in North Korea's point of view? First, it is moving the nation towards independence at the world stage. Compared to other communist countries, North Korea is more isolated. As you can see here, national survival is the guiding principle of North Korea's diplomatic strategy. They also promote self-sufficiency in economy and defense, specifically adhering to a planned economy. The means of production are owned by the state and most services are also state-funded. The government restrains all basic liberties and also uses brutal collective punishments to silence and to control the people. However, North Korea seems to be showing signs of changes. It's starting to be more open to the rest of the world, shown through its recent diplomatic engagement with South Korea and US, which was once its enemies.